In this video we're going to have a look at Andrew Waterhouse's Climbing My Grandfather. So to start off with, this poem is most likely from the perspective of the poet, and it uses an extended metaphor to explore his relationship with his grandfather. And that metaphor is all about climbing. He starts with the feet, with the brogues, the shoes, and then he goes on to the trousers, then he goes on to the belt, he goes on to the shirt as well, and he gets further and further all the way until he gets to the summit, which obviously proves to be his hair and his head. And this idea of climbing his grandfather, this extended metaphor, is probably an exploration of his relationship with his grandfather and how he gets to know his grandfather. So, without any further ado, let's get into the poem. It starts off with then, I decide to do it free, without a rope or net. So starting off, he's not using a rope or net, and if you're climbing without a rope or net, you're doing it with a considerable risk here because there's nothing to catch you when you fall. So this means that he's taking a risk to get to know his grandfather, but he decides to do it anyway because he obviously thinks that the benefits outweigh any kind of loss that he's going to find if he doesn't do it, basically. So, moving on, it says first, the old brogues, dusty and cracked. So it's important to know that brogues, they're a type of shoes, and then if they're dusty, it means that they probably haven't been worn in a while. So the grandfather probably hasn't moved around, he's probably not very mobile, and therefore he's not wearing his shoes, they're dusty. But the idea that they're cracked suggests that they have been, once upon a time, very well worn, and that means that the grandfather probably has a lot of memories to share with his grandson, with the poet Andrew Waterhouse, when he's getting to know him. So in this case, they have been well worn, it's just they're not very well worn anymore, so there's probably a lot of memories to explore. Moving on then, it says, an easy scramble onto his trousers. So he's getting further and further in this sharing of memories or this relationship with his grandfather as he continues to climb, pushing into the weave, and you can see all of this lexical field or semantic field of climbing. So you've got rope, you've got net, the idea of pushing in, getting a grip, a scramble, these kind of things, and it continues all the way throughout to overhanging and all the way to the bottom of the poem, to the end of the poem. It carries on then, saying, trying to get a grip. By the overhanging shirt I change direction, traverse along his belt to an earth-stained hand. And this is a nice bit of imagery here, an earth-stained hand. It tells us that the grandfather probably worked with his hands and he probably worked outside in nature. And then you've also got the idea of the nails are splintered, which probably shows that he works very hard and that he's had a very physical and very rough life when he has been at work as well. So there's probably plenty to talk about when it comes to hard work as well. So the idea that the nails are splintered means that they give good purchase, which means that he can get a very good grip onto the nails when he's climbing his grandfather. So it's probably a very good conversation about the world of work and what he did for a living when his grandfather was younger. Moving on then, it says the skin of his finger is smooth and thick like warm ice. And you've got a nice oxymoron here, warm ice here. So presumably this might mean that despite the fact that the fingers are cold to the touch, because his circulation might not be fantastic, in this case he says warm ice, so he probably finds a kind of warmth talking about this to his grandfather, and that's maybe why you've got the oxymoron going on here. It continues to say, on his arm I discover the glassy ridge of a scar, place my feet gently. So he finds a scar on his arm, and that scar might be a literal scar, it could be a scar that he's obviously received when it comes to some kind of physical injury, and then it might also be an emotional scar as well. But the important part is that he places his feet gently. So this word gently is kind of important, that he's sensitive when he's talking about this injury, whether it is emotional or whether it is actually a physical injury, he's gentle. And so getting to know him or climbing his grandfather, he does it sensitively because he clearly doesn't want to upset his grandfather whilst climbing or getting to know him. So he places the feet gently in the old stitches and he moves on. So they have their conversation and then they move on, it's final, they pass after that, they pass over that one and get further into their relationship, into a different subject. It moves on then, it says, at his still firm shoulder I rest for a while in the shade, not looking down, for climbing has its dangers. So continuing to climb up the body, nothing much more to say there. Still firm shoulder says that he's still got some strength left in him, especially with his shoulders and his arms here. And then it moves on to say, then pull myself up the loose skin of his neck to a smiling mouth to drink among teeth. Whilst this is a really odd bit of imagery, he's drinking among teeth and he ends up refreshed. It says that maybe the smiling mouth and being able to drink among them is his words and his stories, and so maybe he feels refreshed once hearing all of these stories from his grandfather. He continues to say, I cross the screed cheek. Now, screed is that loose kind of gravel that you get on the sides of mountains, which says that probably the screed cheek is quite rough. And that might be that it's weathered due to age, it might be weathered due to work, or it could just be that we've got a bit of imagery representing the grandfather's stubble. Probably the former rather than the latter. It continues then, so he crosses the screed cheek to stare into his brown eyes, watch a pupil slowly open and close, then up over the forehead, the wrinkles well spaced and easy to his thick hair, soft and white at this altitude. So, white hair reveals his age, that he's an elderly man at this altitude, so we're getting close to the top, the summit of this mountain, and we're almost finished with this climb, with this relationship. Afterwards then it says, reaching for the summit where gasping for breath I can only lie, watching clouds and birds circle, feeling his heat, knowing the slow pulse of his good heart. So at this moment here we've got gasping for breath. This was quite tiring for the poet, and getting to know him tells him it's been actually quite a tiring and quite a difficult experience, but it is a really positive one because of this final line, the slow pulse of his good heart, this really kind of warm ending that we've got in the poem here. And so he feels better, he feels a little bit more attached to his grandfather as a result of the climb, or as a result of the conversations that they have been having. So they're much closer by the end of the poem.